All right, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to check out Peter Thiel's philosophy on why competition is for losers. Now, he gave like a much longer speech on it, which I'll show some parts of, but this kind of is like a summary of the whole speech that he gave. And realistically, he's not the first person to come up with this concept of competition is for losers, because David Rockefeller also said competition is a sin in one of his books. I didn't read the book, but anyway. So you can see that monopoly capitalists don't actually believe in competing in a free market, basically, is what he's talking about. So we'll get into the video real quick and then I'll add some comments.
Is this idea that 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 and I sort of frame it as and this is probably maybe the single overarching theme is that we think of capitalism and competition as synonyms, and I believe they are antonyms. I believe that a capitalist is someone who's in the business of accumulating capital. A world of perfect competition is a world where all the profits are competed away. So if you want to compete in a crazy way, you should open a restaurant. You will never make any money doing so.
I mean, what he's saying there makes complete sense. Because he's saying, like, for instance, McDonald's versus Burger King, they have to, like, do a race to the bottom with quality and prices, right? Like, you can never get a really good hamburger at McDonald's or Burger King because they're both trying to outcompete each other, and they lose money in the process of trying to undercut the costs of the other company, right? Because they're in the exact same market. They're both selling the exact same cheeseburger, basically.
And at the other end of the spectrum, what I think everybody who is a founder or entrepreneur should aim to do is build a monopoly. And all the great companies that people have built are monopolies of one sort or another. And I sort of use Google as the extreme example on the other end, where it's.
So he's saying that all good companies are monopolies, right? Basically all highly profitable companies are monopolies. So when people tell you, oh, having a monopoly is bad, or there's something inherently evil about monopoly, or they say that monopolies are unavoidable, in fact, it seems like it's very difficult to get a monopoly, according to Peter Thiel, who's now one of the, like, hidden masters of our society. So, when I say the stuff doesn't really matter, but I mean, this guy's like one of the richest people in society. So maybe you might want to listen to him. I don't know.
It's an extremely capitalistic company. It makes enormous amounts of profits, and it's so capitalistic because it's had no competition since 2002, when it definitively distanced itself from Microsoft and Yahoo in the core search business. The opening line of Anna Karenina is that all happy families are alike, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own special way. And I think the opposite is true of business. I think in business, all happy companies are different because they figured out something unique to do, and all unhappy companies are alike because they fail to escape the essential sameness that is competition.
See, so again, we can see that kind of translating into content creation too on the internet, where, everybody's trying to jump on the same trend, the same viral trend or whatever, or algorithmic trend. And it causes a lot of competition, causes people to basically act in certain ways, in non-cooperative ways. And it just pretty much makes everything lower quality, right? And that's where everybody's saying everything's slop, because you can no longer take time to make a thoughtful video or do a research video. Now everything has to be a live stream. It has to be basically real-time live stream, which kind of, because that's what people are looking for. So it kind of lowers the value. Everyone has been talking about that. The video essay is pretty much dead. Long form content is not really what's happening now. It's all about the short form content. And if you're not in that, then you're not really competing. But as you can see, that's why there's so many people competing in the short form content, and only a few people are actually getting all the views.
Wall Street Journal ran an excerpt in my book. The chapter was entitled "All Happy Companies Are Different." They sort of took the chapter and they retitled it "Competition is for Losers," which got a little bit more attention from people, and I think it's but it sort of really gets at sort of the core of this, because we normally think that losers are people who don't compete intensely enough. The people who are the losers are the ones who fail to compete really hard, and it's sort of like you have sort of a educational testing model, a grading model, sort of an athletics framework or something like that. A loser is someone who's not very competitive. And so if you say competition for losers, that sort of really gets at the core of this difference. And I think this monopoly versus competition idea, there's sort of an intellectual reason people don't understand it. And it's very poorly understood, I think, even in Silicon.
Yeah, the intellectual reason is because they teach the exact opposite in school. All the left-wing kind of like progressive institutions that we call public schools teach people that have monopolies bad, and that they have too much power, and maybe they do, but it makes sense what he's saying, that you basically just shouldn't even enter into a market if there's already somebody in it. You should just come up with a new idea, a new product, a new niche. And that's basically what he's saying. He's not saying that making something new is for losers, or that coming up with a product or service is for losers. He's saying that entering into a pre-existing market that's already providing the goods and services or whatever products is for losers, basically. And then trying to, make your way up the thing is for losers. He's saying just make your own thing, right? It's like marketing versus advertising. He's like, make your own market, right? Don't enter into a market that's already pre-existing.
Silicon Valley, because the people who have monopolies pretend not to have them, and the people who don't have monopolies pretend to have them, and so it gets kind of confusing. So if you and the way you do this rhetorically is, if you have a monopoly and you don't want the government to look into it too much, you will say that you are in a much bigger business. So if you're Google, you will never say that you're a search engine. You will say you're a technology company, and technology is a vast, incredibly competitive space. And you're competing with Apple on iPhones, and you're competing with Microsoft on Word documents, and you're competing with Facebook on social, and with the Detroit car companies with your self-driving car. And there's just competition everywhere. And if you and on the other hand, if you're in a completely competitive business. Let's say you're trying to open a restaurant in London, which is, if you decide to do that after this talk this evening, and you try to get investors for your restaurant in London. This will be hard to do, and they'll say, well, it's a bad business, no one makes money, everyone just loses money when they open restaurants. And you will say, well, this is totally different from any other restaurant. It will be the only British, Nepalese fusion cuisine within a 5-block radius of the LSE. And
See, so like he's saying there that, like taking it back to like content creation example, he's saying like, maybe you think you're starting a channel and it's this niche like channel for like people that only work out with their toes or something like that, but you're still just another person making videos on YouTube. And so it's not really that original, even though you want to tell yourself that you're in this like tiny niche. You're really competing with everybody on YouTube for views. Right.
And so you sort of tell an idiosyncratic fictional story where it's too small. And so because people are constantly telling these fictional stories that distort what's going on, there is this real failure to understand the centrality of this monopoly versus competition dichotomy. But I think there's also, I think it's not just an intellectual failure. I think it is also a sort of a psychological failure. And I think that we are.
Again, I would say it's an educational failure, because if our educational system is producing people that don't even understand the system that they're in, I know it's either on purpose, which it kind of seems like because it's so consistent everywhere, but I mean, it could just be that over time, the education system has become kind of like, I guess, corrupted or in some way that's not on purpose, but it still seems like maybe it's just the left wing stuff. Let's keep it real. It's just the left wing stuff.
There's something where we find competition strangely reassuring. We find it validating. When you compete for things, you think there are lots of people doing it, and there's sort of is this perception of safety in crowds. If a lot of people are trying to get something, it must be valuable, and therefore you know it. Whereas if nobody's trying to do something, that's already really, really uncomfortable.
Yeah, but isn't that the capitalist theory of value, that the value of something is whatever somebody will pay for it? So that, I mean, that kind of doesn't make any sense.
And I think this, the word ape already in the time of Shakespeare meant both primate and to imitate. And there is this rather disturbing aspect of human nature where people are ape-like, sheep-like, lemming-like, unbelievably herd-like. And we're sort of attracted to doing things that other people do. We're attracted to compete for all these and compete the most intensely for things that often matter the least. And what competition does is it does.
So there he's talking about validation. He's saying that a lot of times people enter into these, I guess you can say, similar markets where there's already a bunch of people in it because they want validation that they've outcompeted the other people, right? So they're not really doing it for profit. They're doing it for validation reasons.
Does make you better at whatever you are competing on. And I'll give the high school athletics. You're on like a swim team in high school, and you will focus on the other people on your swim team, and you will get to be a better swimmer. But it always comes at the price of losing sight of things that are perhaps more important or more valuable. I think that's always sort of this distortion. There's a classic Henry Kissinger line about his fellow professors at Harvard, where the battles are so intense in academia because the stakes are so small. And you always think, on one level, you think this is a sort of a description of insanity. It's like, why would the battles be so intense if there's so little at stake? But it's on another level, it is just the logic of the situation working its way out. When the differences are tiny, you have to fight incredibly hard to differentiate yourself, and the smaller the differences get, the smaller the stakes get. Paradoxically, the more you have to fight to get ahead. And so I do think we should always ask whether it really makes sense to try to go through the tiny, tiny door through which everybody's trying to cram through when there's a giant gate, perhaps just around the corner that no one is even thinking about taking.
Right. So he's basically saying that, entering into competitive markets is not the smartest thing to do. So now he goes into more detail in this longer lecture. I'll just kind of go through some of the points. Like right here where he's talking about, this is the characteristics of monopoly. Proprietary technology, meaning that you own the whole chain of production of the technology, basically. Network effects. I've talked about network effects. Economies of scale. I've talked about, scaling. That's one of the reasons what makes like making content creation or music or reproducible art valuable. That's why I was saying before about, why do musicians make more money than, say for instance like accountants or something like that, because of the scale. You can only do accounting for so many people, where you can technically sell an infinite amount of records, or at least an amount of records equivalent to the amount of people on the planet, right? Technically. I mean, obviously it won't actually happen that way. And of course, branding, marketing, all that stuff. Right. Then he's talking about how, it goes into this.
Breakthrough in technology, but then also being able to explain why yours will be the last breakthrough, or at least the last breakthrough for a long time, or where you make a breakthrough and then you can keep improving on it at a quick enough pace that no one can ever catch up. So if you have a structure of the future where there's a lot of innovation and other people will come up with new things in the thing you're working on, that's great for society. It's actually not that good for your business typically. And then economies of scale, we already talked about. So I think this last mover thing is very critical. I'm always tempted, I don't want to overdo the chess analogies, but the first mover in chess is someone who plays white. White is about a 1/3 of a pawn advantage, so there's a small advantage to going first. You want to be the last mover who wins the game, and so there's always the Capablanca world champion, chess champion Capablanca line. You must begin by studying the end game, and I do think that's, well, I wouldn't say that's the only thing you should study. I think this sort of perspective of asking these questions, why will this still be the leading company 10, 15, 20 years from now, is a really critical one to try to think through.
All right. So again, he's saying the opposite of what most people say. Most people say, oh, being the first mover, that's the best thing ever because you invent the thing. There's a part where he's talking about how to take over a company, how you take over companies. Oh, here it is.
Gradually expand into all sorts of different forms of e-commerce and other things beyond that. eBay, you start with Pez dispensers, you move on to Beanie Babies, and eventually it's all these different auctions for all these sorts of different goods. And what's very counterintuitive about many of these companies is they often start with markets that are so small that people don't think that they're valuable at all when you get started. The PayPal version of this was we started with power sellers on eBay, which was about 20,000 people. When we first saw this happening in December of '99, January 2000, right after we launched, there was a sense that these were all, it was such a small market, it was terrible, we thought these were terrible customers to have, it's just people selling junk on the internet, why in the world do we want to be going after this market? But there was a way to get a product that was much better for everybody in that market. You could, and we got to something like 25, 30% market penetration in 2 or 3 months, and you got some lock-in, you got brand recognition, and you're able to build the business from there. So
yeah, he's saying start in a tiny market where you can buy the entire market yourself and take complete control of the market. Again, counterintuitive to what everybody's taught. Everybody's taught, you're supposed to compete. You got to get out there and put out your resume and just do the best job possible, right? That's what he's talking about. People kind of following each other.
Trying to do something that's proof of it being valuable. I think it's when lots of people are trying to do something that is often proof of insanity. There are 20,000 people a year who move to Los Angeles to become movie stars. About 20 of them make it.
Notice he's not a populist. Not a populist, because that's basically the anti-populist argument.
I think the Olympics are a little bit better because you have you can sort of figure out pretty quickly whether you're good or not. So there's a little bit less of a dead weight loss to society. The sort of educational experience at a place, the pre-Stanford educational experience. There's always sort of a non-competitive characterization where I think most of the people in this room had machine guns and they were competing with people with bows and arrows. So it wasn't exactly a parallel competition when you were in junior high school and high school. There's always a question, does the tournament make sense as you keep going? And this is, there is always this question, if people go on to grad school or postdoctoral educations, does the intensity of the competition really make sense? There's the classic Henry Kissinger line that describing his fellow faculty at Harvard, that the battles were so ferocious because the stakes were so small, describing sort of academia. And you sort of think on one level, this is a description of
All right, he already said that part. So yeah, basically you get the gist of what he's talking about. This is basically what he's teaching people, and this is his philosophy, is that competing with other people is kind of dumb, and that just trying to make your own niche or create a new product or something like that or service is actually a better thing to do. And like that's what he's saying. If you see a bunch of people doing something, most people assume that it's valuable just because there's a lot of people doing it, and that's populism, right? Where it's really a bad argument, because people say, oh well, hey, you can know where to eat because all the people in the neighborhood are eating at that place, so that must mean it's the best restaurant. But most people eat at McDonald's. And is McDonald's actually the best restaurant? No. Right? Everybody knows McDonald's isn't the best restaurant. So it's a kind of he's kind of like anti-populist, monopolist, one of these people that's pushing kind of technology as a way to bypass government regulation and bypass basically any type of regulation and just take control. He's just about taking control. He's like, I'm going to go into a market, buy out the whole market. If the market's too big, right? If you're in a market that's too big, then you want to specialize and shrink down your company and take it out of that market. But you also want to pretend like you're not a monopoly when you are a monopoly, right? And people believe that they're more specialized than they actually are when a lot of the time when they enter markets, like when he was talking about the restaurant thing, where you think you're making this niche, unique restaurant, but it's still just a restaurant. And there's tons of other restaurants that people can go to. So that's the video. Thanks for watching if you did. Have a good day and peace.